You know how I've been in charge the past few years? Yeah, I screwed that up, man. You know, but give me another chance, I'll fix it. So the electors were, the electorate was so angry that they launched a recall and said, kick him out of office. So they had a special election because enough people signed a petition to have a special election to throw him out of office. That's what happened. And then that's when Schwarzenegger says, we're running for governor. And so we're like, well, the politicians screwed it up. This guy's really strong. And I really, Terminator, I dig his movies, so let's vote for this guy. No experience at all in politics. And so that's how Schwarzenegger becomes governor. In that exact same election, where we were pissed off because the governor pointed out that we were $42 billion in debt, California also, the voters also said, you know, we should have a high-speed rail system. And we voted to build a high-speed rail system for the bargain price of only $45 billion. Which all analysts at the time said, oh, this won't build it. It's going to be closer to like 150, 200 billion. And then they're like, no, it's not. We can do 45 billion. So in the exact same election, we were pissed off. 42 billion in debt? Get rid of that bastard. Ooh, trains. Democracy, actually. And then we're going to screw it up, and that's what we do. And then once we screwed up, we kind of go like, hey, can someone fix this? And then one dude comes along and is like, I got you, man. We're going to rebuild this country, but you got to give me power to do it. And that's going to look like a dictatorship. In other words, things get so bad that somebody rises up into power who can fix everything for us. Where have you seen that before? Throughout world history. This is what you find. This is when you have a killer comes to power, you have the fascists in the 20th century. Going back before that, this is where you always see this. This is what always ends up happening. You know? And so, take a wild guess. Which of these? What ancient civilization can we think of that's very strong on honor and military commitment? The Aztecs? Sparta, yeah. So Socrates looks at them and says, man, that's Sparta. They're not an aristocracy, but they're ruled by the honorable. And then Socrates is talking, and he turns to the group and says, hey, stupid, guess which one you are? And the crowd agrees. What's Athens? Democracy. That's us! He sees that more as this Athens. So when he's pointing out, saying that Spartan culture is superior to Athens, this is what he's talking about. Because he believes that all of these political systems devolve. That aristocracy inevitably becomes a democracy, which inevitably becomes an oligarchy because we get comfortable, which inevitably becomes a democracy, which inevitably becomes a tyranny. And then he believes you have complete civilizational collapse, and then something comes up in its place. So if you're following that timeline, buy gold, But he argues that they're more up here. Now this is an important thing because we look at this and go, okay, so it's politics, so what? It's a central concept to Socrates that things break down and devolve over time. And that there's a perfect state of things, and then there are these less perfect state of things. And that we should be striving towards the perfect state of things. Because, we'll see why. So, questions? So, because Socrates is a big supporter of Alcibiades, because he believes that Sparta is better than Athens and is not ashamed to talk about it, you can imagine what happens. Socrates runs afoul of the Athenians. But one of the ways he does it is because of how he interacts with people. So, for example, Socrates, it was said once by when he went to go see an oracle at one point, which is like a fortune teller, you can think of it that way, the oracle at Delphi. Again, if you played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you know the oracle at Delphi. it was said of Socrates that he was the wisest person to ever live. And Socrates heard that, and he goes, no way, man, I don't know anything. You know, I don't know a single thing. I'm completely ignorant. And then the oracle said, that's why you're so smart. That's why you're so wise, I'm sorry. Because you know one thing, that you know nothing. Whereas the rest of us walk around thinking that we know things, which we don't know anything. So we know 0, Socrates knows 1, therefore Socrates is the wisest person to ever live. You follow? So Socrates kind of makes a living of this, where he goes around and he says, I want to learn some stuff. I want to know the truth about things. So he goes to talk to experts about things. You know? So for example, he comes across a man who's supposed to be an expert in piety. You know, in other words, what's good? What's goodness? Like religious goodness. And so if I ask you, like, what's good? You know, what's absolute goodness come from? Well, it comes from God. You know, what God says is good, what God says is bad. Now, of course, what problem do you run into in Athens at this time with that? Many gods. And so Socrates goes to me and says, I'm an expert. So he says, well, okay, so what's good? Well, good is what the gods love, and evil is what the gods hate. Very sure of himself, very confident. So Socrates points out exactly that. He says, but our stories, our histories are full of the gods warring among each other. Yes, they do not get along. Well then, how is it that we know which god we should be following? Because if the gods disagree, you can do one thing that's loved by one god and hated by the other. So is that good or evil? You know, is that pious or impious? And Socrates said, and then of course the person Socrates is talking to says, I'd love to answer your questions, but I'm late. I have to get somewhere.
He's like, you're annoying.
Yeah, exactly. He insults Socrates and storms away and all that. And this is how most of Socrates' dialogues go. It's him asking a person questions, never really stating anything, just asking a bunch of questions, hoping he can learn by asking questions. But it pisses people off. Now, of course, if he's going to, like, let's say, like authority figures, like, let's say, for example, if somebody were to walk in and talk to a teacher in front of a class and demonstrate that the teacher didn't know anything, who would love to see that? Students, yeah. How many of y'all would love to see someone come in here and make me look like an idiot? You know, all you have to do is let me talk long enough. I'll prove I'm an idiot. So people will come in and do that, and the students will be like, oh my God, did you see what Socrates just did to that guy? You know? So students would see that, and they start to imitate it. They're like, all I got to do is ask him questions. In fact, there's your homework. Go embarrass one of your teachers for the whole class. Just ask him questions. How do you know this is true? And so because of that, he starts to get a following of young people following him around, like, Socrates is my teacher. Now, Socrates says he was never a teacher because he never took a dime from anybody. That would have been a job. You know how he felt about jobs. But he never took a dime from anybody for being a teacher. He just wandered around and would do this. But he engaged experts in certain fields. He didn't just pick on people. So because of that, young people started seeing it. And then, of course, that meant that they learned how to question things. So then what did they do? They went back to where they were coming from. They went back to class. They went back to their parents. They went back to every area of society and began to question the things that they came across. Now, of course, that doesn't go well. You start asking a bunch of questions. Again, don't believe me. Try it in your classes. Start asking your teachers those questions. And eventually you're going to piss people off. It's just, obviously, no one likes to be questioned because going back to what Saz was saying with the quote, it's a process of conscious learning that injures the self-esteem of others. Now, Socrates also claimed that he had a daemon. You can tell me what this is. Essentially, it was a voice in his head that told him when he was about to do something he shouldn't do, the voice told him not to do it. Right? So what is that? Not schizophrenia, but what is that? That voice in your head. Yeah, it's your conscience. So essentially, he claimed to have this thing which he called his daemon, which we would call a conscience, that when he was about to do something he shouldn't have done, the daemon would tell him, don't do that. Yeah, and then you go, ooh, I guess I shouldn't do that. And he'd back off of it. So he wasn't ashamed of talking about that. He talked about it openly. So in short, he gets arrested. And he's tried with 2 significant crimes. The first one, corrupting the youth. Which, by the way, is a huge deal. Because if you can corrupt the youth of a generation, that country will be weaker the next generation. And it will be even weaker the next generation. And if your civilization survives that long, it will be taken over certainly by the next generation. The idea is that our Our system is to degenerate. If you allow a system to be corrupt, just like with those political systems, the same is true generationally. So don't miss this. Essentially, if you corrupt the youth, it's treason. You're destroying a country. So Socrates is charged with that, which carries with it the death penalty. So he's accused of corrupting the youth. Second thing he's accused of is impiety, essentially introducing foreign gods into Athens. And what's the foreign god that he introduces into Athens? What we would call a conscience, his daemon. So it's impiety. He's being charged essentially with refusing to acknowledge the Athenian gods, not giving proper credit to the Athenian gods. So he's charged with corrupting the youth, and he's charged with impiety, not acknowledging the Athenian gods. His defenses are relatively straightforward. He says, you're charging me with corrupting the youth. How is that? And he's charged by a guy named Meletus. That's the prosecutor. Oh, by the way, it's a jury trial. And the jury trial works like this. You hear one day that Socrates has been arrested, and he's being put on trial. So you say, I want to be on that jury. So you go down to the court, and you're now on that jury. You just show up and say, I want to be on the jury. And they go, all right, are you a citizen? Yeah, all right, come on in. You're part of the jury. So the average jury trial that we have records for back then is about 7 people per jury, 6 to 7 people per jury. Socrates' jury was about 600. So a lot of people showed up because he was very famous. They wrote plays about him, making fun of him. Socrates was very, very well known, very famous all over Greece, not just even in Athens. So when he goes on trial, over 600 people show up to be part of the jury. And his defense essentially goes like this. You're saying I corrupt the youth. How do I do that? Meletus says, because you're a teacher. And you're leading them down bad avenues. And Socrates says, I'm not a teacher. A teacher is a profession, right? I've never taken a dime for teaching. No one's ever paid me for it. So I'm not really a teacher. I'm a guy who goes around, asks questions, and challenges some things. And other people follow me, but I don't have any control over that. I'm not telling them to follow me. I'm not teaching. I'm not telling them anything directly. I'm having conversations with people. So if they get corrupted, that's not up to me. I mean, I have a right to ask questions and to talk to people. I'm not responsible for how other people perceive it. And so, grudgingly, okay. And then secondly, with the impiety, he says, I never denied the gods. I never said that those gods don't exist. I'm just telling you that I got a voice in my head that's telling me not to do certain things. So if I'm about to say something I really should say, I really shouldn't say, that thing tells me, Socrates, don't say it. It's going to get you into trouble. If I'm about to do something that I probably shouldn't do, that voice, that daemon tells me, don't do it. I can back off of it. But whether it's a god or not, he says, I don't know. I don't know what's speaking to me. I just know that something is speaking to me. And so that's a very simple way of putting his defense. It's a little more complicated than that. It's a little more interesting than even just that. But that's the essence of it. So, in short, the jury goes out, they come back, and they find him guilty. Yeah, he's convicted. And we're told it's a very narrow margin, somewhere between 20 and 40 votes, depending on the source. So we have we have 2 different sources for this stuff. Remember, keep in mind that Socrates never wrote anything down. So the stuff that we have about his life comes from other people, other students of his and all that, mostly from Plato. Which, by the way, sometimes you'll notice that people will use Plato and Socrates interchangeably. That's why, because Socrates didn't write anything down. But so when we say Socrates said such and such, we generally mean Plato wrote this down. So we have it from Plato. So he's convicted. And the jury comes back, and part of their legal system, he's allowed to come up with to offer his own punishment. So he's able to go to court and say, I recommend this punishment for myself. And so he comes up and he addresses the court and essentially just says, I've got 2 ideas for how you can punish me for this. And he acknowledges the severity of what he's been charged with. He says, corrupting the youth, man, that's treason. I understand that can destroy the civilization. And he acknowledges this. He also acknowledges the thing about the gods and all that. And he says, so because I've been charged with something so significant, and because the consequences of me teaching people to ask questions are so dire, I suggest one of the 2 possible punishments. Not death, he says, but something like this. How about you fine me? And he says, how about like $100? essentially what amounts to about $100 today, or $1,300. And he says, I don't have the money, by the way, because like I said, I'm not a teacher, but I can borrow the money from these people over here. And he says, because if one old man coming along and asking questions is enough to destroy your whole culture, that's all it's worth is $100. Not something you want to say to a jury that has your life in their hands. Socrates just DGAF, man. And then he said, I have a second plan. If you don't like that one, I've got another one. And they're like, yeah, let's hear it. This will be good. Over in Athens, up on a hill in Athens, there was a hall called the Prytaneum. And the Prytaneum was only open once every few, whenever the Olympic Games were held, the Prytaneum was open for one day after the games were all over. And it was a day in which they invited all of the Olympic champions up there for one feast. It was one of the highest honors you could be given in Athens, was to have a banquet at the Prytaneum. So Socrates said, my second punishment is this. How about you open the Prytaneum to me every day for lunch? You should give me lunch every day in the Prytaneum, because I'm the greatest champion that Athens has ever known.
That's true.
Yeah, so the jury just kind of says, so you're the greatest champion they've ever had, and you think our civilization's only worth $100. All right, we'll be back. So the jury goes off, and they have to vote on punishment. They, surprisingly surprised, overwhelmingly they don't select one of his options. Instead, they vote for death.
Wow.
So Socrates is kind of like, huh. Oh, and by the way, while he was talking about how their civilization was worth nothing, and how he should be given lunch because he's a champion of Athens by teaching them their wrongs, he said to them, oh, by the way, remember that demon I was talking about that warns me to shut up? Yeah, it's not telling me to shut up, so here I go. And he goes off on them. So he's sentenced to die. And he's sentenced to die by drinking hemlock. Hemlock. You ever hear of hemlock before? Yeah, it's a naturally occurring herb, but it's poisonous. And it becomes famous just because of its use in the death of Socrates. So he's sentenced to drinking hemlock. And he goes in, so we pick up the scene from Plato, the death of Socrates, where he's in the execution chamber, and his wife is in there, and she's crying because she still loves him, God knows why. And he sends her away because he can't stand all this crying. And he's telling his students, God, they're crying like this is a bad thing. This is a good thing, I'm about to die. And his students are like, oh, come on, teacher, this is bad. In fact, his students go so far as to bribe the guards and say, dude, we just bribed the guards, let's get out of here. And Socrates, being Socrates, says, let's think about this. Would it be a good thing for me to escape? And he has a kind of a pretty neat defense for it. He says, Athens has always been good to me. It provided safety for me. It provided an education. It provided a home. It provided all of these things for me. He says, how would it look if I said, hey, Athens is great. Athens is wonderful. I make my home in Athens. That all of a sudden when Athens does something I don't like, sentences me to death, I go, screw Athens, and walk away. He says, I have a duty to Athens. Athens has always supported me and done all these things for me. It educated me, gave me a home, gave me safety, gave me security, gave me law, gave me all this. So no, I can't turn my back and run away from Athens. And his students are interesting. His students are like, oh, and by the way, he says, by the way, if I do escape with you, because his students are saying, dude, we have a place for you and everything. There's a city that will take you. And it's a city with a very bad reputation, by the way. And he says, well, what if I do go there? He says, if I go there, I'm just going to be a sideshow anyway. People are going to be like, oh my God, that's Socrates. Did you hear how he escaped? Socrates, tell us a story. He would just be like a monkey from the organ grinder, he said. And besides which, he says, I've lived my whole life talking about virtue, about honor, doing the right thing, do justice, cost what it may, all of the stuff I've spent my whole life talking about. Well, how would it look if I now said, I'm going to die? Well, screw all that philosophy stuff. He said, my opinion would be worth nothing at that point. I'd be a hypocrite. I'd be deserving of all the scorn that I got, because I would have been found out for what I really am, somebody who didn't tell the truth. So he says, I'm not going to die that way. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to do the right thing.
So his pride was very strong?
You can see it as pride, or you can see it as commitment to his ideals. In other words, it wasn't just a matter of like, I'm going to do what I want to do. It was more of, well, I believe this stuff. Oh, it's like, I mean, if you get somebody who's particularly religious, who's like, man, when I die, I'm going off to glory. I'm going to go see, I'm going to go to heaven, I'm going to hang out with God, oh, glory. And then when something happens and they almost die, oh my God, I almost died. shouldn't you have been like, oh man, almost. I can't wait for that day, you know? How many people do you know who are particularly religious who are just like, oh yeah, and then they find out, they go to the doctor and they go, cancer, stage 4, stage 4, stage 4, please. Bad news, it's inoperable, it's stage 4. Yes, thank you, God. That's not usually how it happens, you know? Now, I'm not saying that people who don't respond that way aren't true believers. I'm just saying we got some questions, right? I mean, obviously things can shock you. Maybe after you go, oh wait, no, that's not such a bad thing. Because now I get to, this is the thing, Socrates believed it. He believed it. It wasn't just, philosophy is not just something that you say to people. It's a thing that shapes and guides every aspect of your life if you're doing it right. It establishes your principles, establishes what virtue is. It gives you focus and clarity and meaning and freedom in a way that other people don't have it. You know, if you're someone who doesn't have ideals or you're just kind of bumbling around the world and you find yourself, you're like, oh, man, I feel like I got no purpose or meaning, I don't know what to do. No shit, because you haven't thought about it. You don't have that focus that other people have. You know, very few people. So he says, nope, I'm going to stay and take my punishment. So the executioner, as he comes in, mixes up the hemlock and gives it to him. Socrates asks him, what do I do? I've never done this before. That's funny. He still has a sense of humor. So the executioner tells him, drink the hemlock, and if you want it to work faster, walk around, because then it will go through your blood system faster. It's going to start with your feet. You'll start to get cold. It'll work its way into your legs. You won't be able to stand anymore. You'll need to be laid down at that point. Eventually, it'll work its way up your body. It's going to reach your heart. And when it reaches your heart will stop and you'll be dead. So talk to him. You say, all right, good news. Downs this thing. Looking for more. That's not in the story. I made that part up. He puts the thing down. And he starts to, all right, so let's talk. Starts walking around and pacing around the room, talking with his students. And they're talking about the nature of the soul and about afterlife and so forth. So eventually he wobbles, the students catch him, and they put him up on the deathbed, and they're getting very sad, and he's like, oh, come on, guys, I sent my wife away because she was crying. Don't be them. This is a good thing, I'm about to die. And eventually that poison works its way up, and as it's getting up to his heart, he turns to one of his students, Crito, and he says to him, Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Could you make sure the debt's paid? And Asclepius says to him, Crito says to him, the debt will be paid. He says, thank you. And then he dies. That's it. Now it's an interesting thing because we look back on it and we go like, oh, what a noble man. He only owed one thing in the world, a chicken. And he wanted to make sure that that debt was paid so he left no debts behind. But that's not what it means.
But did it actually get paid?
Yes. But that's not what it means. Asclepius is not a person. Asclepius is a demigod. The demigod of medicine. Yeah, essentially he says to Crito, sacrifice a chicken to the god of medicine because we owe him a debt. What debt does he owe the god of medicine? Well, the medicine he was just given, which was hemlock. Well, if that was medicine, what was the disease? Take a guess. What is the disease? What's physical life.
Oh.
That your body, your physical, your mortal life is a disease. And he believes that hemlock, therefore, is the solution. Quick asterisk. Don't kill yourself. You know? Let me explain why he believes that. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's going to go pretty quick. How do we know what we know? Going back to that question. Again, he's hung up on this idea that we seem to know things that we shouldn't know. And here's his solution. He believes, and this is called the theory of the forms. Theory of the forms. Socrates believes that before you were born, before you were a physical body, you've always existed in spiritual form. He believed that before you were born, your spirit, your soul ever ran around out in the cosmos and encountered everything. Everywhere in the universe, you've been there. But it's a spiritual plane. So how is it that you know, for example, what perfection is? He argued that when you were in spiritual form, you interacted with the idea of perfection back then. Well, how about eternity? How did you know what eternity was? Because that's an eternal place. It has no beginning, it has no end. That's how you know what eternity is, because you have experienced it, but you didn't experience it with your five senses. What did you experience it with? Look at your paper. What did you experience it with? Where does all knowledge come from?
The mind.
Yeah, the mind. You've experienced it with your mind, with your soul. You're going back to Jung, your psyche. So he argues that while you were out there, you learned what eternity was because you were living in it. You experienced it. He argues that that's where you interacted with this idea of perfection. That's how you know what perfection is, because you were a perfect spirit. You were a perfect soul. That's how you know what it is, because that is your nature. That's what you were. And that's what, in essence, you really are. Now, again, he believes you encountered everything. He believes that you encountered a chair, and that, therefore, you learned what the perfect form of a chair was. You know what a perfect chair is supposed to look like and be like and what its function is because you've experienced it before. You know what, like the color, whatever, purple or whatever, you know, what these things are because you've experienced them before. Have you ever interacted with a person and you feel like you've known him forever?
Yeah.
Like, oh man, you feel like you've met him before, but you just met him? Yeah, it's because we're all running around out there, man. You know, some people, hey, cool, you interacted a while and you came back. And the idea is that you interacted with those spirits and those souls out there at some point. And then when you're here, you're like, I recognize you. You don't recognize them from their physical body, but you recognize that there's something at that metaphysical level, the spiritual level, that when you talk to them, you're like, yeah. And this is when Aristotle comes along and says, what's a friend? It's a single soul dwelling in two bodies. In other words, you're so close with somebody, it's like your souls have interacted before. That's that, yeah.
So, like, if you see some random person on the street and you're like, you're sure you've seen them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're sure you've seen them before. You're sure you know something about them. Yeah. And so, what that means is that you know everything. Do you know some things? Do you know many things? What do you know? Everything.
But you still don't know.
What's that?
But you still know nothing.
Yeah, but that's the problem, because how do you gain your knowledge in this life?
With everything.
How do you gain your knowledge in this life? I just screwed up and said the first part of it.
Life is pretty different.
And how do you experience life?
With your
With your five senses. Because something bad happened to you. You were running around out here in the cosmos. Oh man, this is great! You're encountering the whole universe around you. You're encountering eternity, perfection, chairs, purple. You're interacting with people out here. Hey, what's up, soul? I know you. Ah. And all of a sudden, one day, your mom and dad meet to have too much tequila. And then 9 months later, as you're running around the universe, you get sucked down, man, right into a physical body. And you are born.
That's why you come out crying.
Yeah, that's why you come out crying. You ever see a newborn baby? The baby's like, where the fuck am I? What just happened to me? Because this is a weird thing to look at. You've never seen this before. This is a strange thing to look at. You've always encountered things in the spiritual form. All of a sudden, now you're looking at it and you're like, what is that? It looks like a chair. Yeah, I suppose so. But it's not a perfect ideal of a chair. It's a bad copy of a chair. And that's your whole life. You're now wandering around in this world down here, and you're encountering stuff that, like, where do you get the idea of a chair from? Remember, you've already experienced it. So you want to make a chair, what do? You have little flashes of recollection from that spiritual world. But the problem is that when you were born, the experience is so traumatic, you've forgotten everything. You know? And so, what does that mean? Well, therefore it means that you have a spirit, you have a soul. That's your true nature. This physical body is just a disease that for which hemlock was the cure for Socrates anyway. And so your whole life going through life, you're constantly going to remember things. Now, therefore, yeah.
And didn't you also say that has to do with genetics too?
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there. And so, what does this look like to you? We're talking about the genetic memories and stuff from Jung. What does this look like?
A brain.
Squiggles.
No, from Jung, man. Come on.
Consciousness.
Yeah. No, what is this, man? What is it?
The collective.
Collective unconscious. Yeah, that there's this collective unconscious that we've all kind of encountered, we all draw knowledge from together as well. You know, Jung didn't know he was, Jung postulates this idea of genetics and DNA before we have a full understanding of it and everything. But the idea is that there is this whole knowledge pool from which we all draw. Now, as a teacher, does that mean I can teach you anything consciously? No, it's an injury to your self-esteem. But what I can do is ask you questions. So for example, you're going to notice that today I've been asking you a lot of questions. And I haven't told you the answer to anything. I didn't tell you all knowledge comes through your 5 senses. I asked you, how do you derive knowledge? And then you started answering my questions, and me just asking you the right questions unlocked that you already knew through your 5 senses. I didn't tell you that. You guys already knew it. I just reminded you by asking you the right questions. So for Socrates, the process of learning is not a teacher teaching you and telling you anything. It's this process of helping you remember, asking questions to help you remember what you already know. Have you ever gone through life and like I used the example earlier, you're watching Jeopardy, and there's a question, and then you answer it, and you're like, how did I know that? It's smart, aren't it? And you have no idea where you learned it from. The question was asked just right, so it reminded you about the knowledge that you already had. And he goes through in his dialogues and demonstrates it several times. He comes across a slave boy, for example, who's never been to school, and he asks him this mathematical problem, and the slave kid says, dude, I've never been to school, I just told you. Okay, so just by asking him a series of questions, he discovers that the slave boy can answer it. So at the end of it, the slave looks at the equation, they write it down in the dirt, and he goes, huh, I wonder how I knew the answer to that. Because Socrates didn't teach him anything, he just asked him questions. And then the slave's like, oh, I wonder how I knew that, and walked away. And Socrates just pointed to his friend and goes, you know? He demonstrates it time and time and time again. And this is why Socrates asks questions. You hear about the Socratic method of teaching. The Socratic method of teaching is to ask questions. That's where it comes from. Now, the implications here are deep, if what he's talking about is true. By the way, this solves a lot of problems. When we sit there and we go like, yeah, but is there any proof? Proof is the proper interpretation of the evidence. And he's provided a great deal of evidence here. He points out, for example, again, you know things that you shouldn't know. You know, you experience, you have these connections with people that you have no idea why you have those connections with them. But again, that big thing, these things that you never have experienced before, you have knowledge of. Another, it's kind of anecdotal, but another piece of evidence is I wonder how many of you are this person where you walk around the world and you're like, I don't belong here. Or the life that you're living and experiencing is unsatisfying. Like you feel like, God, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something more. I don't belong here. And your soul is almost like yearning out for something greater than what you're experiencing here. So again, if that's you and you're walking around and you're like, I don't belong here, man. Well, yeah, you don't belong here. You're a soul that was captured by a body that's holding on to it. And then once you finally do pass and you do die, you can sacrifice your chicken to Asclepius because he sends you back up to the realm that you actually do belong in. Because this is a realm of perfection up here. This is one where you don't decay, where you don't die, where things don't change, where everything is perfect.
Why do we care about health?
What's that?
Why do we care about health?
About health? You wouldn't care so much about health. The reason you care about health, what we understand now, is just because it helps your brain. And you don't want to suffer pain. Like physical, because again, a big part of this is people will look at this and say, so he's saying the physical world isn't real. No, the physical world is real. People will teach this sometimes and say he's teaching us that the physical world is an illusion. No, bullshit, it's not an illusion. If you think that the physical world is an illusion, go kick the pole outside, the middle pole, with your shin as hard as you can. You're going to find out that the physical world is real, and it hurts. It is real. So this is one of the reasons you care about health, because if you don't, it hurts. But secondly, your health also will influence, impact your cognitive abilities, your abilities to think. Because the body doesn't help the mind, but it can drag it down. It can distract it. All those times when you're sitting there going like, man, I'm really hungry. Talking about all the stuff you want to eat. That's your body, man. And it's distracting your mind from the things that matter. All those desires you have, like, I want to drive a badass car. Okay, so work your whole life to get a badass car and you haven't gotten any closer to a knowledge of who you really are. you're still empty. You're still pursuing physical, material things. You're basically just that thing that runs around the maze that the researchers can throw cheese at once in a while and tell you, go for it, go pursue the maze, little rat. You know? It's like, man, whatever, money, go for it. And you're going to find out why it is that suicide is a disease of the wealthy, not of the poor. Because the poor know something that the wealthy don't know, which is what it is to introspect and know who you are. You know? And so, if you're that person, that's why you feel like you don't belong. You'll get there. Now, no rush. Don't go rushing into it and go like, all right, and jump off the Toronto Bridge. Because, again, life hurts. So does water at high velocity. But moreover, you're here anyway. You're going to go back there at some point. You're going back there. But why? Don't be in a rush for it. Because what you do here will still impact people around you. But what this also means, by the way, is that you matter. And I mean that in a real sense. Process that for a second. If this is what you are, then that means that you matter. Even if you feel like you don't, even if you feel like things are hopeless and they're never going to get better, of course they're going to get better. Of course. You know, you have to stay the course. You've got to be here for them to get better. But the point is that you matter in very deep, eternal ways. But here's the problem. So does everybody else. And so that means that you should stop friggin' treating people like they don't. And that includes yourself. To not treat yourself like you don't matter. Because if you treat yourself like you don't matter, you're going to act like you don't matter. And that's going to lead to all kinds of horrible, destructive things. And that's one of the reasons that people do it, because of that lack of self-esteem, that self-hatred that people will accumulate. And the idea is that that self-hatred you have, you don't deserve it. There's something greater than what you are here. Oh, but I've done bad things, says lots of people. That doesn't mean you should revel in it. That doesn't mean you should celebrate the bad things that you've done. But you also shouldn't let it stop you from remembering who you are, and what you are, which is eternally perfect and good and spiritual. All these things. So when Socrates wants to make sure that that debt is paid to the god of medicine, that's the disease that he wants to be freed from. And this is what he's defending when he writes the Allegory of the Cave, which we're going to look at next time. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Complaints? Criticisms? Critiques? Yeah.
Doesn't that follow reincarnation?
Another teacher was asking me that a couple days ago. Possible. Quite possible. In other words, can you be pulled down multiple times? I don't know of a place where Socrates talks about that. But he seems to leave it open for that. And that would suggest the same thing, because now you have obviously all of these memories, but you also have the memory of yourself from before. Yeah, so now you have all of that and all of that as well. Seems to suggest that, a possibility for that. Others? So, happy Thursday.
We matter.
When we come in next time, we're going to start the actual story itself, the Allegory of the Cave.
Now
And
we
then we'll
matter.
move from there.
Last semester I didn't matter, now we matter.
Now, yeah, last semester you didn't matter, remember? Now you matter. Right, you're the last 10.
Have you heard of Black Lives Matter? No, our Lives Matter.